righty. So most importantly, their food. So I'm going to be taking us through the various categories of food that you might find in a cookbook, starting with vegetables. Some foods may seem perfectly normal to you because they're ones that you eat and they're familiar, others perhaps not so much. And this is the first time that I'm doing this talk. So if you are thinking of things that, oh, that's really unusual, or my family did this, please come and tell me that after the talk, because I'd like to, extend and include more. So many of the Pennsylvania German foods, while they're odd, they're certainly delicious. So you are welcome to take any pictures of recipes that you see that you might be interested in trying out. Okay, Meredith, the advance button did not advance. Should I hit? I was just doing this, but I could go up to here. Should I try it that way? Nope.
There.
And you just hit that? Okay,
I think I just needed to click on the screen.
Ah, got it. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't move. Yeah. Is that better? Or you could also move, Thomas. That's another option. Okay. So from Alan Kaiser's book, and here is Alan Kaiser. Where did that just go? Here is Alan from last year's Gosh and Hoppin' Festival. And incidentally, that's me. Someone took that picture and sent it to me, and I'm like, I got a picture of Alan. That's great. So from his book, How We Ate, comes the following limerick involving cabbage. There was a young damsel from Reading who used cabbage leaves for her bedding. When the bed was worn out, she ate it for kraut. This herbivorous damsel from Reading. Since cabbage was a much beloved food, it's even mentioned in wills, sometimes widows being bequeathed garden space, and sometimes a specified number of cabbage heads. So according to Kaiser's research, it was usually multiples of 25 heads, ranging from 25 to 75 per year. So that averages out to about a half head up to 1.5 heads of cabbage per week. So think about your consumption of cabbage. Sometime around All Saints' Day, that's November 1st, cabbage heads that had not been turned into sauerkraut were pulled up and packed root up in a pit in the garden and covered with leaves or straw. A Muhlenberg October 31st, 1781 diary entry says, and I quote, "Our womenfolk buried the cabbage in the back garden for winter." And from the Mary Markley Boyer diary in November 1845, quote, "4th of this month, we made our sauerkraut, Elizabeth and I, cut 15 heads." So this recipe is in the book, How We Ate. And this describes how to make sauerkraut. Anybody here actually make sauerkraut? Okay, there's a few hands. It says to cut the cabbage fine, put a layer of it in the bottom of the cask, sprinkle on salt, pound it till moist or wet with the juice. And I recall doing that for my mother when I was a kid. It was great fun for kids to pound on cabbage. Like we didn't have the internet back then. Put on another layer of cabbage, salt and pound as before, and so on till all the cabbage be thus packed down. Lay a cloth over it, a board cover, and a heavy weight on it. And about a week after, a thick scum will rise. Take off the weight board and cloth, and with a wet cloth, wash off the cabbage, or it will smell. After washing the cloth, put it on again with the board cover and weight. When you take out any cabbage for use, take it off even, wash the cloth, and replace all as before. Dandelion. The Pennsylvania Dutch had a holiday where everyone ate greens on Maundy Thursday. Most often it was dandelion, since that's what was available. One needs to harvest the greens prior to blooming, as then the green is bitter. Some thought it would prevent a fever for the following year. Alfred Shoemaker collected the following statement in 1953 from a 70-year-old lady of York County, quote, "One will be stubborn all year long unless one eats something green on Green Thursday." And here's a traditional recipe for dandelion dressing, the hot bacon dressing. How many of you like that? Ah, lots of you. How many of you make that? Okay, very good. So some of the earlier recipes do not include any sugar, but I chose this one of Nancy's because I think we're more accustomed to having that sweet and sour. And then, once the dandelion blooms, you can have the pleasure of making dandelion wine. Any of you try this? Ah, all right. I made it once. This recipe was given to me by Ronnie Treichler, Gosh and Hoppin' Historians, with the instructions that it would be ready at Christmas. So you're making it when the blossoms are, of course, blooming and supposedly ready for Christmas. I have a very distinct memory of sampling it at Christmas, and I didn't need any more. The picture here, though, is literally from like 3 weeks ago. We were together with local chef Eric Clymer, and he brought as a hostess gift a bottle of dandelion wine that his grandmother had made. So we all had some. Better than mine. Still, I did not need to drink at all. I think I poured all of our samples together in the glass just to take the picture, and then, poured it out again, took a sip just to say, and then, yeah, I don't know that anybody. So if you ever did drink it, you'd understand why thinking about dandelion wine brought this punch to mind. And the vinegar jug there belonged to Nancy Rowan's mother, Cora Hassan. And that's a picture there of Nancy Rowan, if you were not familiar with her. Nancy and Alan Kaiser are like the culinary experts in the region. Treasures, both of them. Here we have a cider press. Any of the black and white photographs that you see in this presentation are owned here at the Schwenkfelder Center, and they're from H. Winslow Fegley, usually circa 1900. So many folks made 2 pressings of cider from each batch. The first to be used as cider or turned into apple butter, and the second known as Wasser cider or water cider. It was made by pouring water over the pressed pomace and letting it stand. Some let it go for several days until it began to ferment, and then it was pressed again. Then it still needed what was known as a mother to turn it into vinegar. How many of you know what a mother is in terms of, okay. I have a distinct memory of that because I accidentally, as a child, knocked the vinegar jar in the cellar stairway. I knocked it over and it hit the step, of course, spilled, and the mother went flop, flop, flop down the steps, much like a slinky. So I have a very distinct memory of what the mother was like. You needed one. Okay, this is the Schwenkfelder Chow Chow. So this is the chow chow made by the Schwenkfelder. Every year, I believe they do this. So vinegar was used to preserve a variety of foods. One food is, of course, chow chow or piccalilli. Usually every vegetable is cooked separately to maintain its original color or flavor and then combined. So here's a recipe from the Nancy Rowan archives. Good selection of vegetables, although it might be anyone's guess how much 5 cents of ground mustard would be today. So you can always use your own recipe, I guess, for the vinegar part of it and just use there. And this is the recipe that's used by the Gosh and Hoppin' historians for the chow chow that's available each year at the Christmas market. And there you have it. Yeah. Red beets were eaten hot with butter or pickled cold. According to Alan Kaiser, 3 different methods were used: boiling in a kettle, baking in a crock, and roasted buried in ashes or embers on the open hearth. I am not personally a big fan of red beets. Our cold cellar at home held carrots, potatoes, and red beets. I wasn't fond of being sent down there to get any of them, mainly because it was dark and I was afraid as a kid, but I also didn't want to eat them. My sister recently commented that red beets tasted like dirt. But they're a great color. So pickled red beets, yes. Kaiser says they are most likely an old food, with the earliest reference from an 1835 Lancaster County manuscript. And then the next slide, I have the recipe for it. I thought this is interesting here, the addition of ginger. I don't know That's not something that I do when I make red beets. Anybody have that in there? Yeah, I thought that was something that was different. All right, preparing onions for market. Here's another quirky story from How We Ate. I told you I'd be referencing it quite frequently. Alan recounts that on July 14, 1817, a man named Thomas Cope found at breakfast, I quote, the very common German dish of fried onions, which the landlady presented to us in her best style, swimming in fat. Thomas apparently did not care for this dish, as he wrote in his 1801 diary. So 16 years previously, he was somewhere else. I quote, the landlady appeared to exert herself to entertain us. Among other things, she gave us a large dish of fried onions swimming in fat. So apparently that was a dish. It's a cheap dish for poor families was onion gravy, sliced onions, fried in butter, flour added, and then milk. This was spooned over bread and was the main dish. Maybe not quite so inviting to our palates, but then there's this Spatzen, which indicates at the end here, it's particularly delicious when served with fried onions. And then there's swivlekuche or onion cake. How many of you have had swivlekuche? Yeah, Nancy Rowan notes that as, quote, as late as the 1920s, John Klein, proprietor of the Perkiomen Heights Hotel. How many of you remember the I see some heads nodding, okay. It's at the intersection of Route 663 and Kutztown Road. So they made a swivlekuche or onion cake there. So it was about 100 years ago. It's a yeast dough with onions on top. And this is made at the 18th century auntie's house at the Goschenhoppen Festival each year. And that's where this image is from. And it's a much sought after treat. So here's the recipe if you would like to try it. So yeah, it is a yeast dough. And then you spread cooled fried bacon and onions on top. I made it recently. I think I used a pound of bacon just because I had a pound of bacon and I didn't have any other use for it. That might have been too much bacon. I don't know. I have a picture of what I did. That's this. I probably rolled the dough too thin because the crust was rather crispy rather than feeling like a yeast dough. And I used a pound of bacon and I used 4 onions. So that's what I did. It looks okay, good. It was sort of pizza-like, as I recall. Yeah. And here we have a less involved onion pie from the Nancy Rowan archives. I don't know if she's a relative, Lizzie Wolfgang Bauer, but sounds good. And I like in this recipe how you judge the milk. So, yeah, you're putting in the onions, pinch of salt, butter, pour milk on until you can see it. There you go. That's a nice way of saying it. Yeah. Our next oddity is green tomato pie. How many of you have had green tomato pie? Make green tomato pie? Okay, not too many. Here is the recipe that we use at the Goschenhoppen Folk Festival. It does call for sweet dough strips to cover with sweet dough strips. And so I have that recipe on the next slide if you're interested in this. It's a good use for tomatoes at the end of the growing season. They're green. We're going to have frost. What do you do with it? The Pennsylvania Dutch always used everything. So pie it is. And then here's the recipe for sweet dough strips, which is identical to AB cake. Next up is the potato, a vegetable that our ancestors found in the New World and certainly embraced. So this was something that was new to them. Every family had a potato patch and many were consumed. There's multiple references to the humble potato in wills and diaries and account books as far back as 1734. A hearth fire was great for baking the potatoes deep in the ashes. As for mashed potatoes, the Sarah Yates cookbook, that's from Lancaster County, has a late 1700s recipe that calls for potatoes to, quote, work them up in a paste. So mashed potatoes. Here we have in Henry Auntie's house, built in 1736. So if you could envision potatoes being buried in those ashes to bake. Many foods were reheated in lard in the frying pan, and certainly potatoes were. One way was to fry up pieces of bread and leftover sliced potatoes. That dish was called Hossenshire, meaning house and barn. I just literally had that recently, took a picture, but didn't get it in the slideshow, so that'll have to be updated. Another dish that's still made in many households is yellow stockings. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Where you add fried potatoes with scrambled eggs. Now, I was unable to confirm this story, but I think my father would talk about a Treichler neighbor family that grew and ate 18 bushels of potatoes each year. My sister remembers there being 7 kids, so maybe that's plausible. You're probably wondering what is odd about a potato, because why on earth am I talking about that? Well, in our neck of the woods, we have an unusual food known as Boovishankel. And according to the atlasobscura.com, the Quakertown Farmers Market is the only commercial enterprise where you can still purchase Buva. So if you don't know what Boovishankel is, I don't know how well you can see this, but loosely translated, it means boy's foot, thigh, or pocket. It's a large Pennsylvania Dutch style pierogi is how it's described. And they say their homemade boovas start with an old family recipe handed down for generations. The boovas are made with a classic egg dough filled with a delicious potato filling. So that's mashed potatoes, celery, onions, and parsley, cooked, sauteed in butter, and then covered with fried onions or gravy. So how many of you have had Boovishankel? Ah, yes. So if you want to purchase them, they are available only at the Quakertown Farmers Market, which I think is just open like Fridays and Saturdays. And Sunday too? Okay, so here we have a picture of them. A 1907 description of Buva in Pennsylvania German magazine says if they're made properly, and I remember the first time I tried it, they literally went out the door. I just slid the door open and just heaved the whole pot because I was having some trouble. But if they're made properly, served with a topping of gravy and buttered breadcrumbs, they're a dish fit for the gods. Some cooks would cook a roast, boil the potatoes in the boovas in the beef broth, and then serve them with the beef on the side. John Hefner of Berks County wanted his with bacon in them. So there you go. Another option. So this is a Buva from the Buva Haas in Quakertown, because, I had to do research, so I had to get this. And there's a dish with a related name, the Manshankel, meaning men's thighs, is a fruit-filled yeast dough, like a moon pie. I don't have any pictures of that. Anybody ever run into that? So Manshankel. And in a few slides from now, you'll hear a food that's named for girls' thighs. Another variation in this dish was known as greengenep in Dutch and chive pies in English. And so this recipe is from How We Ate from the book. I'll try to read it, although I usually end up drooling by the end of this. It's really amazing. So saute together bits of bacon and onion. When these are nearly done, add a good amount of chives or parsley so a good green color is achieved. Drain the bacon grease. Meanwhile, mashed potatoes without milk or butter, season with salt and pepper to taste, beat lightly 2 or 3 eggs to add to the above mixture. Finally, stir the bacon, onion, and chives in the potato egg combination. Make your favorite pot pie noodle dough and roll it out very thin, cutting in rounds or squares large enough to hold a good spoonful of that potato mixture, about 3 inches in diameter. Drop these in boiling beef broth and cook until done. When ready to serve, snip more parsley or chives over them to add more green. Anybody drooling? Doesn't that sound like, sounds so wonderful. If you know Jennifer Conrad, one of the Gashenappen historians, she made this, actually that was Saturday. I have pictures of this too, and I got to eat it. It's wonderful. So here would be Nancy Rowan's Boovishankel recipe, both for the dough, and she describes what to do here for the filling. But the next slide has more instructions concerning the filling. This is from 1955. So one of Nancy's tablets dated 1955. And here we have like the actual filling, if you want to have her version of that. Here's the sauteed onions and celery in butter. Interestingly, Nancy Rowan would start with onions and then add the celery. How many of you make like potato filling or, okay, we have quite a few people. So Alan Kaiser would start with celery and then add the onions. Like these things matter, to people. So that was a conversation I had with Alan. I thought, oh, I bet they discuss that often. More bread seems to be used in Montgomery County than in Berks. And some spirited discussions can ensue if cooks from both counties are asked to work together. There's also the issue of whether to brown in the oven or saute it in butter, or both. Okay, I had an hour-long discussion once with a friend about this. I let him win, but he uses way too much bread. So here's the potato filling prior to baking. It is crucial to culinary success to eat a bowl full at this point, to ensure success. Make sure it's okay. And then here it is baked. Nancy Rowan would often refer to the holy triumvirate of Pennsylvania German foods, and that was flour, butter, and potatoes. Yeah. And this recipe is in the Nancy Rowan archives for potato candy. It's just cooked potato, has a little butter, and she adds potato water, and then confectioned sugar to the proper consistency and shaped into little balls. When I would make potato candy, and a few of us were talking about this beforehand, we roll it out and spread it with peanut butter and roll it up, and it's more like a spiral. So then you get some protein. Then it's like a reason to eat it. And here's potato pudding. This is considered a dessert. Nancy Rowan will refer to this as an as-is recipe. So whatever she meant by that, she had as-is written on there. Notice it takes 10 eggs. Yikes, an expensive recipe. All right, and another fine use of potatoes is chicken pot pie, which clearly is not a pie, but we can understand why it's called that from how it was traditionally made on the open hearth. The recipes from the 1800s were all basically the same, and they were based on a British meat pie. They started by lining the sides of an iron kettle with dough, then putting the meat in, then adding diced potatoes, as well as squares of dough, and finally a top dough with a hole. The hole allowed steam to escape and provided a place to add water. They were boiled for various lengths of time, hour and a half to 5 hours. So, it's a challenge. When it was served, the meat and potato and dough in the pot were dished onto a platter, leaving the gravy. Then the top crust was cut into squares, placed over the rest. And eventually the Pennsylvania Duchess eliminated the middle step of lining the kettle and covering it with pastry. They rolled out the noodle dough and cut it into squares. And that's, what we have today. So here's a recipe from the Mary Elizabeth Muhlenberg cookery book from 1823. How she would have done pot pie. And from Nancy Rowan, we have her, so the basic recipe. And then if you really are serious about this, when you start with, that's to serve like 30 to 35 people. That's if you have a lot of friends that like pot pie. Opinions differ on how thick the noodles should be, so I aim to please whoever I'm cooking for. So these were some of mine, obviously, for someone who likes the noodles fairly thick. Others of you might look at that and go, ooh, they need to be thinner. So that's a personal preference, just like potato filling. And hooky house, which is a very localized tradition since we grew up with it. My sister Sarah is here today, and we can't find anybody else who's ever heard of it. Smoked sausage, potatoes, and kidney beans. We believe the name comes from the Boyertown, Berks County, Friendship Hook and Ladder Firehouse, which served it. Anybody here know hooky house? Ah, all right. Well, here's the recipe. I found it in the Boyertown area cookery book from 1978. So, it's a very basic, wonderful meal. I don't add sugar in mine, but that's called for here. It's part of the recipe. I do like the name. I don't know the individual. If anybody here is from Boyertown, that would, but Old Sack, Warbach's sister, like who on earth has a nickname of Old Sack? Yeah. Ah, Schnitzenepp, a traditional dish that is still made today. It was such a common dish at one time that recipes for it were only a recipe for the dumplings. Kaiser cites a 1946 cookbook that has 2 recipes for Schnitzenepp in the section titled meat, but they don't mention meat. It's just a recipe for the dumplings. You gotta love that. Yeah. So here's some Schnitzenepp that was served here at Schwenkfelder. According to Kaiser also, bacon was the original meat used, with ham being more recent. That was new to me. Anybody ever make Schnitzenepp with bacon? Always ham, right? Yeah. So, and older recipes often use yeast in the dumplings. So the instructions to not lift the lid. Were you told that as a child? Don't lift. That meant something, right? If it was yeast. Our mother always said that. Then, of course, whoever didn't listen was the one blamed if the dumplings weren't right. Sarah, you want to say anything about that? So here we have a recipe for Schnitzenepp from the Boyertown Cookbook. And here's a rather odd soup that deserves a mention is pretzel soup. Anybody grow up with pretzel soup? Okay. Only a couple of hands there, yeah. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, pretzel soup was made with hard, salty pretzels, popular supper dish. Lebanon County pretzel soup was made by breaking up a quantity of pretzels in a soup bowl, sprinkling crumbled pieces of bacon over it, and then pouring cream over this to cover and adding a lump of butter. All right. So what I remember at home was just pretzels and hot milk. Yeah, it's like, it's a very simple soup. And here's a recent Facebook posting, and this was a comment someone wrote. My family is from the Berks County area, and Reading has always had a lot of pretzel makers. During the Depression, hard pretzels that were too broken to be sold were very, very cheap or free. My grandmother lived through the Depression on pretzel soup. It's simply broken hard pretzels and milk, or if things were rough, water. Yeah. Okay. Before we head into the world of pork, let us first consider the humble eel, once very plentiful in this region. Picture of eel. And we'll go right to a picture of Nancy Rowan frying eel in a pan. Lots happened in between there. So back in 2010, Goshawken historians Nancy Rowan, Mel Baker, and Bob Wood, and there were others involved too. Bob, you want to wave your hand just so everybody sees who you are in case they want to talk to you about this? There you go. They were asked by the cable show Bizarre Foods to do an episode, and it was filmed. It was shown, I believe, internationally, but not here in the US. The night that it was to be televised, instead, they showed Philly cheesesteaks, which bizarre. Anyway, so Nancy Rowan was part of this. I remember Mel talking about it too. If you want to hear more about the process, I think, Bob might be willing to tell you. I didn't think I should show those pictures. I did locate images, like I have a good 15 images because they recorded everything, but I didn't want you to leave. So I just picked out this one of Nancy happily cooking in her kitchen. And here we have the pieces of eel. Yes. Apparently, according to Kaiser, there's a story in here of eel, like there were so many of them that it clogged the water wheel of the mill. So yeah, they wanted to have them eaten. And Mel she was a fellow teacher of mine, and she did bring some to school, and I had it in my mouth when she started to describe how they did it. So I got it down. Anyway, talk to Bob. He'd have all the details. So yes, eel was eaten. It actually didn't taste bad before I heard. Enough said. All right. Oh, I think we have here. Okay, I don't have the recipe, but there is a cookbook out in Lancaster Historical Society. There's an 1815 recipe for eel. So there is a recipe out there if you would like it. With the approach of winter, offering natural refrigeration, it was important to lay in a supply of meat. In most families, that meant butchering several pigs and perhaps a steer. So here you're going to be seeing some pictures from the Gassenhappen Folk Festival that's held in August. If you have never been there, I would advise attending. Today, commercial casings are used to make sausage, but back in the day, it was the pig intestines. They were turned inside out and scraped clean. And literally this morning on my walk, I ran into a woman who was talking about her mother doing exactly what I'm about to describe, because she knew I was doing this talk. And she said, oh, I remember my mom having to, and this is how it went. It generally was a task assigned to the older women in the family. The final cleaning, I quote, she sat with a crock on her lap with several inches of water, the intestine, and a shingle on a slant. To clean the inside out intestine, she scraped it with either a dull table knife or a tool made from a beef rib or a piece of wood. It was critical that the intestine be thoroughly cleaned without tearing holes, which makes sense. So that would have been a job of the older women in the family. Again, from the H. Winslow collection here. If they made more than they could consume before it spoiled, they preserved it by either packing it in salt, smoking it, or frying it fresh, packing it in a gallon crock. If fried, put in a crock, then they would pour melted lard over the whole amount to keep out the air, and preserved it that way. Our ancestors were smart. Some smoked sausage from the festival. And here we have a recipe from the Nancy Rowan archive. So if you're interested and you happen to have a pig, here you go. The quantity of hot pepper flakes does amuse me. Like things that are spicy today, I think people who like spicy foods probably want more than 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon. Although this is a small amount of pork too. It just struck me as funny when I read that. I thought, well, that's not all that spicy. But there you go. Nobody's taking pictures of that. Imagine them. All right. So, stuffed pig stomach. Here's a story from Nancy Rowan that can be found in the Boyertown Cookery book from 1978. So she explains how to clean a pig stomach. Should you become the proud owner of an uncleaned pig stomach, this is the way to tackle the cleaning job. Empty the original contents by cutting a slit at one of the natural openings, turning it inside out. Rinse thoroughly, then while still inside out, carefully remove by pulling the lining of the stomach. This requires a certain amount of patience, but you'll get the hang of it by the time you've done your 3rd or 4th stomach. You can just hear Nancy. I mean, those of you that know Nancy, you can just hear her there. And if you didn't know her, you can tell she has a wonderful sense of humor. Then rinse again, put to soak in salt for several hours. If you're not up to cooking the thing at this point, wrap and freeze for later use. A favorite filling consists of potatoes, onions, smoked sausage, or ribs with some parsley for color. To prepare it, it's boiled or roasted and then browned in butter in a frying pan. Or in this case, it was just roasted until brown. Pig stomach was at one time a dish so highly esteemed at Christmas, it was called Dutch goose. Any of you in here make pig stomach? Ooh. Look around, good people to know. And here's a recipe from Nancy. Pretty basic in terms of, the list of ingredients. And another special meat dish would be stuffed beef heart. And so she describes here how to make that. Ending with, considering that animals have only one heart or stomach, it's no surprise that these were special dishes. Nancy also used beef heart in her mincemeat, and I have that recipe for you, so you'll see that shortly. And here's the recipe for salting the meat, if you wanted to smoke it. And the smokehouse at Gassenhappen. So they had this fired up last year. And from inside, I think these images kind of make you go yum, right? The next one, not so much. Brains. They were a normal source of protein in our childhood home, so I didn't question it. Like, I don't think too common today. Any of you make brains? Did you have brains as a child? Mom would saute it with eggs, like fry it up with eggs. I don't know, we ate them. And Eric Clymer, I mentioned earlier, this was recent for him. He bought brains and breaded and fried them. I said, just send me a picture. I don't need to have it. All right. Beef tongue was either cut pickled, smoked, and stored for later use. Mary Elizabeth Muhlenberg at her 1823 manuscript cookbook says, quote, leave tongues in pickle 12 or 14 days. And you may, if you've been up to Dietrich Meats in Crumsville, you may recognize the scene here. They were very gracious and it kept getting things out for me to photograph. We bought a bunch of stuff too, but it was like, oh, can I take a picture of that? So a lot of these pictures are from Dietrich's. Mary Markley Boyer writes in her diary on March 15, 1841, took the last tongues out of pickle and hung them up to smoke. And here we have cooked beef tongue that's ready to eat and also pickled. Not inexpensive. And here's a recipe from the Boyertown Area Cookery book if you prefer to make it yourself. Nobody taking a picture. What does pickled tongue taste like? Okay, please answer that.
My son didn't know what it was,
Okay.
and this was offered to him, and he thought, looks like a lunch meat to me.
Mhm.
That's what, and he tasted it and he said, seems like roast beef. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And now he will eat tongue. He might not have if he had known what it was, but he will now because he liked it.
That's kind of like me with the eel, but maybe even not that far. All right. So last year for the legacy dinner here at Schwenkfelder, we did do beef tongue. So you see the four tongues here, they're cooked, and Eric gave me the job of peeling them. Thank you, Eric. And I tried to slice it so that it didn't look very tongue-like. So yeah, I rotated the pieces in the pan or whatever. And then the sauce that we used was based on a 19th century horseradish sauce from Allen's book. So we served that here and people seemed to enjoy it a great deal. So beef tongue. They had a choice between pig stomach and beef tongue. So maybe, maybe that was the issue. I don't know. And these are smoked pig's feet because I don't have an image yet for pickled pig's feet. So if any of you make pickled pig's feet, I want an image. But I do have a recipe for you. So I don't have a picture, but here you go if you want to try making it. All right, to something a little more familiar. And then there's, yeah, scrapple. So this was from Groundhog Day at the Mennonite Heritage Center, where we made scrapple. One thing that many butchers and farmers took to the Philadelphia market was scrapple. Scrapple was made from the less desirable parts of the pig, the heart, lungs, liver, head. The broth from boiling the meat was strained, all the bones were removed from the meat, and it was chopped fine. If panhas was to be made, now is anybody familiar with panhas? Okay, this gets a little tricky. If panhas was made, half the broth was set aside for that, and then the rest put back in the kettle, made into scrapple. Wheat flour, buckwheat flour, cornmeal were added slowly while cooking, and it would have been flavored with sage, marjoram, coriander, salt, and pepper. Alan Kaiser tells us in most areas of southeastern Pennsylvania, panhas was the word for scrapple, so interchangeable. Except there's a narrow band running along the southeastern boundary of Dutch country through Montgomery and Bucks County. This is where the rebels were. Yeah. Their panhas was not scrapple. Panhas contained no meat, but was made with the broth and then added buckwheat and roasted cornmeal. Many farmers in this region no longer made panhas by the first quarter of the 20th century because it was considered poor man's scrapple, less desirable. But you can find these two options at Shady Maple. So here is, is scrapple, and this is called pan pudding. The earliest written scrapple recipe comes from a Quaker woman in New Jersey, of all places. Sarah Lippincott gave instructions in her recipe book of the early 1830s. I quote, "To make scrap pudding or scrapple, take the skins, faces, and hearts, boil them until they're tender, then take them out and chop them fine. Take as much stale wheat bread chopped fine and Indian meal as you have meat. After it's seasoned, put it back in the kettle, stir it while boiling, take it out in basins to cool." And a Fegley photo of scrapple. Once it's fully cooked, the scrapple was dipped into crocks. In the early period, they would have used redware crocks, and then more recently, stoneware. In central Montgomery County, scrapple loaf pans that were tin came into general use after 1900. Pouring into scrapple pans, cutting it in slices and frying hard, 20th century development. Is that how we all like it? Sliced and fried? Yeah. During the last half of the 20th century, tastes and preferences changed and sage was no longer added. So the evolution of scrapple. To prepare scrapple for the table, the cook dipped it from the crock with a large spoon, put it in the frying pan, and stirred it until it's heated. Depending on the area and the family, they applied different toppings to complement its flavor. And I imagine we could have quite a discussion here on this. In Montgomery County, many still put apple butter on their scrapple. How many would be in the apple butter camp? Pretty many. Elsewhere, molasses is the preferred. Oh, interesting. Look at all the molasses people. Oh, wow. Okay, I have never done that. Still, other families use ketchup. Ah, yes, that's me. Mustard, horseradish. Oh, yes, I'm there. Alan Kaiser's grandfather ate his with chopped raw onions over it, accompanied with apple butter bread. So he got the apple butter, but that was on bread. Onions on the scrapple. These toppings preferences are regional, seems to be of long standing. I think all of us kind of do what our parents did. Yeah, tradition. So here's Nancy's recipe for scrapple. It struck me when I looked at this that it's gluten-free. We consider everything gluten-free to be healthy, right? It's gluten-free because it's made with buckwheat flour. And I have it typed on the next slide. I just think it's fun to see her handwriting, and even obviously that, this was a used recipe. You see some little stains there. So here it is typed. And I love this instruction down here. It's from 2 hogs. 250, you need, 2 hogs. But they only used about half the skin and no ears. Yeah. I hope you're able to see all this. I keep trying to lean over so you're able to see the whole image. But can't move this. All right, here's a selection of summer bologna, Lebanon bologna, and sweet bologna from Dietrich Meats up in Crumsville. And I do have 2 regional recipes from Alan Kaiser's book on the next slide. I have not made either of these, but here you go. The bottom recipe would be what we'd call sweet bologna today. And that would be from Berks County, that Butter Valley, 1830. And here's meat that I wasn't familiar with at Dietrich's. Anybody? I took a picture of it. I don't know what's. And here, this was head cheese, clearly not cheese. When I asked, I was told it was made from the cheeks and jowls of the pig. And because I was taking pictures and I was interested, they kept giving me samples to taste, which was lovely of them. But like, ooh, thank you. Eric, eat this. Okay, on the right of this slide, you see cooked and pressed tripe. Tripe is a beef product made from the kuddelfleck or the stomach. And Nancy Rowan's words from earlier, another quote from Nancy, cleaning a pig stomach does not compare to cleaning Koedelfleck, but it's not a lot of fun either. Here's the same product, but pickled. And Nancy's explanation of how to clean the Koedelfleck as told to Alan Kaiser in 2017. To make the Koedelfleck thoroughly clean, take a section of the second beef stomach, washing and rinsing it until the water runs clean and all grittiness is gone. Then soak it in a strong salt water solution for at least a day and a night. Simmer it for 2 or 3 hours or more until it's tender. If you've ever had tripe, like the word tender does not come to mind. When it is done, cut the tripe into inch cubes, pour over it slightly diluted vinegar, and this was a cold garnish served with the meal. Here's the recipe if you're so inclined. Oh, Lee took the picture. All right. Gonna make some tripe when you get home, Lee? And here we have liver. A good source of protein and iron, very much in the category of love it or hate it, I think. Mary Markley Boyer writes in her diary on January 18, 1841, I put my livers in pickle. And here's liver that was prepared at a local restaurant. So people that enjoy this dish might like some fried onions or gravy to come along. We have people in here that like liver? Yep. Ooh, okay. And then another option is liver pudding. Ooh, lots of murmurings on liver pudding. And I have a recipe for you from Nancy. There you go. Again, you need 2 pigs. It's kind of a, yeah, note the similarity to scrapple as you go down through there. Salt, buckwheat, broth. I mean, and I have it typed out in case, nice and big in case you want to make it. And then there's calf's feet jelly. This just sounds like so much work. Oh my word. I got to read this to you. Boil 4 calves. Well, that's good. You have 4, right, with a calf. So you only need 1 calf to start with, and a gallon of water until almost all is consumed. Then strain it, let it stand until cool. Take off all the fat with a knife. If there's any jelly remaining at the bottom of the dish, after taking it, let it remain there. Put the jelly in a saucepan with a pint of mountain wine. Anybody with that? Okay. Half a pound of loaf sugar, the juice of 4 large lemons. Thank you. Beat the whites of 6 or 8 eggs to a froth. Put them in the saucepan with the shells of the eggs. Like, what are we doing here? Stir it all together till it boils. Let it boil a few minutes. Have ready a flannel bag. Pour it through until it runs clear. Have ready a large china bowl with the lemon peel cut as thin as possible. Let the jelly run into the bowl. So much work. And then there's suet pudding. We're kind of getting away from meats here. This recipe is from Nancy Rowan, also a Berks County manuscript dated mid-19th century. And I recently purchased suet at Dietrich Meat. So if you want to try this, you can get it there if you don't already have a source. Here's our segue back to perhaps some more pleasant contemplations. Lard's a key ingredient of pie crust, therefore. Well, see some pie recipes. Pie itself is not, we wouldn't consider it odd, but there's some unusual ones. Ground cherry, yeah. This is a knowledgeable crowd. I was going to say a lesser known fruit, but no, you obviously know it. Annual garden plant that bears small yellow fruit, falls to the ground when ripe, which we assume is the name for the pie. Here's a recipe and a pie from the Goshenhoppen Festival. And a slice. The wonderful grape pie. Before the development of cultivated varieties, folks collected wild grapes referred to as fox grapes. They are boiled with molasses to preserve for winter pies. Some old recipes don't contain any mention of the seeds. One individual that Kaiser interviewed said, I quote, "In the summer, we were too busy to take out the seeds. In the winter, when we ate the pies, we had more time." And the following slide has a recipe from the 1953 Mennonite Community Cookbook. That is a delicious pie. pumpkin pie, which is different from pumpkin custard. And Nancy corrected me many, many times until I learned. So I heard of me too. You did. Yeah. So this is Nancy's recipe from her mom. From a tablet dated 1945. We made this at the festival, didn't have molasses. I think Sarah sprinkled it with brown sugar and cinnamon. And Alan Kaiser was there. He has been at all 57 festivals. And of course, he had Cora Hassan's pie. So of course, we ran a sample to him and he said it was right. It's all we needed to hear. So here's the typed recipe. And here is an absolutely stunningly beautiful picture of one made by Jennifer Conrad just last month. And she baked it on an open hearth inside a Dutch oven. And so that is a pumpkin pie. We hated to cut into it, but we managed to make ourselves. And here's peppermint pie made with garden mint. That's a pretty unusual one. It does come from York County. Here's the recipe for it. It's an unusual, very good pie. Something about it being from York County makes you think of the York peppermint patty. Yeah. And Schmierkäse, or cottage cheese. Here's another fun quote from Nancy. Pretty much anything from Nancy is fun. The cheese called Schmierkäse is really easy to make and will provide you with a superb cottage cheese for a cheese custard. I was always under the impression whole unpasteurized milk was needed to make cheese. Well, you don't need to be in a first name basis with a cow to make this cheese. So here's a pie ready for the oven. And the actual pie makes like a real tangy custard, and it's especially good with some molasses. And then here's the recipe from the Kaiser family. Joan Kaiser Landis would be Alan's sister. And so this is how she would make it. And this is I made the pie, and yeah, in memory of her. And it's a slice topped with some molasses. And if that's too daunting to think about making your own Schmierkäse, here's a cottage cheese pie recipe from the Mennonite Community Cookbook around 1950. You can just buy cottage cheese. Perfectly acceptable. Almost any food commodity is easy explained by comparing it to something else. Corn pie, for example, that's like the fruit pie, but with corn in instead. But then there's AB cake. It's not a cake, really, like we consider cake. Its flavor, well, vanilla, caramel, not even brown sugar, because some recipes use brown and some granulated. But it is a unique item to this region, I believe. If anybody's heard of it outside of this area, I would like to know. It was originally a cookie, but then all cookies were called cakes, as there was no dialect word for cookie. So just kleine Kuka, or little cake. Alan Kaiser remembers his grandfather telling him to get a kuka from the jar, so he was being told to help himself to a cake. Now the name AB cake refers to a fairly hard breakfast cake that many like to dunk in their coffee. Anybody happen to have it for breakfast today? Oh my word, we have people who ate it this morning. Can easily be located around here. And there's multiple spellings for the word, as you see. And you're about to see 17 different recipes from Nancy's Rowan. Her 1955 tablet had 17 recipes in. I'll go through them quickly if you want to take pictures of them all. I would think it'd be great fun to just round up 16 other people and everybody make one of them, and then, get together and eat them. So yeah, if anybody is taking a picture, yes, there is someone. Let me know when you got it. I'll keep going. All right, here's the next two. Here's the next two. These are all in her 1955 tablet. There's the next two. Oh, this includes the one from her mom. That's probably the one she made. I think that's the last, it is the last three. You now have 17 recipes. Great question. What does AP stands for? There's some discussion about that. Most people, I think, would say it's for Ann Page, a woman who made them and sold them in Philadelphia. So, but I don't know that that's documented. So here we have Lebkuchen or ginger cakes were an all-time favorite cake in the Dutch country. They were advertised for sale as early as 1775, often were combined with beer and pretzels. Like that was beer, pretzels, and Lebkuchen. Just give me that Lebkuchen. Ginger horse cakes were advertised 1811. Obviously still being made 200 years later from a recipe that I found in the Willing Workers Cookbook of 1913. And here's a huckster recipe from 1820, circa 1820, if you're interested in making quantity. Shortly after 1830, the recipe changed as baking soda was introduced. And here we have Nancy's recipe for Lebkuchen, just a sort of a singular amount. And then if you really want a lot, just she had it figured out for times 4. And now we'll take a look at mincemeat quickly, because I know we're getting out of time here. Definitely an English tradition that's still popular around here, so much so for the holidays, sometimes called Christmas pie. From the Mary Markley Boyer Diary, December 1844, she said, 17th of this month, we got our beef. 19th of this month, made our mincemeat. And here's Nancy's recipe, which I made for the first time last Christmas, although I did not have the watermelon preserves, which she also did. And I have the recipe for you if you want to do likewise. And then wine for the mince pie. I wasn't able to find candied orange peel in a store, so I made it. It's like, all right, well, I'll take pictures of it. There's the suet and some of the candied orange peel. The earliest recorded recipe we have is from the Mary Elizabeth Heister manuscript cookbook circa 1805. I have the recipe typed on the next slide, but I think her script is so beautiful. I wanted you to see. So 1805. And so here's it typed. This is in Kaiser's book. And I did ask him like 2 pounds of beef from the sticking piece. That's from the beef neck. That was news to me. How about mincemeat cookies? Sue and Mike Davis made these. And here is Nancy's recipe for mincemeat cookies. Green tomato mincemeat. It says down here, it is a splendid substitute. It is a substitute. I think we made it once at the festival. It was okay. Likewise, this mince pie without meat or apples, like that caught my attention in Nancy's recipes. I'm like, all right, what is it then if it's not? Well, it's bread. So we made this at the festival one year and it was not bad. It's if you were poor and you didn't have the meat, this was not a bad substitute. We end our culinary travels with the beautiful clear toy candy. And I do have a recipe from Nancy for this as well. Her son, Matthew, continues the tradition of making it. And so here's the recipe for the clear toy candy. And you can see that Nancy says it's the formula that they used. All right, we got to give credit where credit is due here from all these different individuals. Thank you for listening to all that. You just saw 150 slides, I hope you know. So thank you for doing that. And like I said towards the beginning, if you thought of something like, why this is odd, why didn't she have it in the presentation? Like this is just off the top of my head. So if you have suggestions, I would love to hear it. Are there any questions though, before we close up here?
Yeah.
Alan?
You think you will?
Well, the theme this year is how we ate. Yeah. So we are hoping. Yeah. Were there any questions? All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for coming.